Hello, I'm Stan Grant and we are at the Jones Sutherland Performing Arts Centre in Penrith tonight for that lovely Penrith welcome. Thank you. On the panel with me is best-selling author of Stolen Focus, Why You Can't Pay Attention, Johann Hari. Former New South Wales Liberal member Catherine Cusack, Minister for Emergency Management and Agriculture Murray Watt. Archibald Prize winning artist and musician Blak Douglas. Founding Director of Western Sydney Women, Amanda Rose, and from Bundaberg, former Resources Minister, or should that be Co-Minister? Keith Pitt. Sorry for that, Keith. It's great to have you all here.
What Scott Morrison did, with all the secrecy around his actions, just fell short of absolutism. A Napoleon who proclaimed himself emperor. What measures is the government going to take to prevent such an abuse of power?
Murray Watt.
I guess that comes to someone in the government first,
It does
doesn't it?
indeed.
Yeah. Well, I think like all Australians, I was just shocked when I heard about this news. It's something that's never happened in Australian history, and I don't think it's something that we ever thought would happen in our own country.
The question, though, was...
what will we do?
What are you going to do?
Well, we're obviously in the process at the moment of getting advice from the Solicitor General, the highest lawyer in the land who represents the government, about what kind of measures can be put in place to ensure that this kind of thing can never happen again. It was never intended to. You know, that's why we have the Constitution. That's why we have all sorts of legislation to protect democracy and protect our system of government. And unfortunately, it seems that the former Prime Minister just rode roughshod over that. And I think it really undermines trust in our system, which is already pretty low. And I think it's a really disgraceful way for the former Prime Minister to have conducted himself.
We are going to come to Keith Pitt in just a moment, but I want to go around the table. Amanda, as someone living in Western Sydney, what have people been saying to you? What have you picked up this week in reaction to this?
How long have you got?
We don't have a whole show. Yeah. Well, we've got a show to talk about this, but not the entire
let's
show.
face it, Western Sydney usually ignored until it's election time, and then all of a sudden they're given all these promises, and most often they're not adhered to. This particular issue, what it has done is not just that the ex-Prime Minister has done this, it now questions every single thing every politician does. Now we're thinking, is that person telling the truth? What is that person up to? So, you know, I did a poll for Western Sydney women, 96% of people don't trust politicians. That is staggering. That is huge. And I don't blame them, to be honest, because of situations like this. But now everything's going to be questioned. So when something is promised or someone announces something, it sounds great, or what are you really up to, what's going on? So I think it's more than just fixing that one issue. I think it's something about transparency throughout the whole government. Let's
do our own poll. Hands up who feels, like Amanda says, that there's a loss of trust, or you've been gobsmacked by what you've seen. Hands up. I should have asked for those who weren't. I think it's unanimous. Johann, you know, you've lived through the UK and you've seen Boris Johnson, and we've all watched that from afar. What have you made of this week here?
Well, Scott Morrison seems to me a bit like herpes. Just when you think it's gone away, it comes back worse than ever. But,
I wasn't expecting to go there so quickly.
You know, and as you can tell from my accent, I am an outsider here. I am from Downton Abbey, and I've been
Upstairs or downstairs?
Sadly, definitely downstairs. But I've been thinking about Scott Morrison a lot in relation to three other leaders, right? So you mentioned Boris Johnson, a person who felt the rules didn't apply to him, to the point that he locked down the country and had parties where they sent out invites saying, bring your own booze. I thought about Donald Trump. I live half the time in the US. A man who thought the rules didn't apply to him, to the point that when he stopped being president, he took classified nuclear secrets out of the White House, and in the past week, the FBI had to raid Mar-a-Lago to get them back. But the person I thought most about, actually, was Angela Merkel. So at the height of COVID, Angela Merkel addressed the German people, and she said to them, the last thing you want to do as a German chancellor with our history is suspend anyone's democratic freedoms. So I am going to be 100% transparent with you every step of the way about what I'm doing and how to stop you. There's a line she said that I thought about so much in relation to Morrison. She said, this is what democracy means. We make political decisions transparent and we explain them. Australians deserve more Merkel and less Morrison, in my view.
My question is for Keith Pitt. I'm an old netballer, taught to play hard and fair. how does it sit with you to play on a team with Scott Morrison when he wants to be the captain, coach and manager and play himself in every position on the court? Does Mr Morrison need to be sat on the sidelines by the umpire until he learns his place and to play by the rules?
There you go, Keith.
Well, I was a netball dad for a while. My girls are getting a bit older now and they haven't continued with any of that. But even to your previous question, I mean, there's been talks about a Royal Commission and investigation and inquiry, and I'm quite supportive of that, as long as it includes all levels of government, because were some strange decisions at a state level as well, whether that's Premier Palaszczuk stopping people from accessing a hospital because they're on the wrong side of the line, massive lockdowns in Victoria, with a whole heap of really challenging positions. But in terms of our government, the previous government, I'm very comfortable with the decisions that I made, 100% rock solid.
Can I just ask,
it's
though,
important
Keith,
to make that point.
Can I just ask, though, Keith, there is a timeline here, and I want to try to get this clear now that you knew in 2021, yes?
It's somewhere in 2021. Okay. I'm working through the details.
So you were aware that Scott Morrison had also sworn himself into your portfolio. He'd made a decision effectively overruling a position that you wanted to take on an offshore project, a gas project.
Well, they're your words, not mine. This is obviously a case that's before appeal in the court right now, so I can't make any specific comment.
He had made that decision. I assume he was making that decision not just as Prime Minister, but also as your co-minister.
Well, he issued a statement in February where he stated that he'd made a decision under the Offshore Petroleum and Gas Act, and that was pretty clear and pretty public. Now, whether I'm uncomfortable, unhappy, it doesn't really matter. That doesn't affect the operation of the government or how decisions are made. It's about ensuring that we are making the right decisions, and they are in accordance with all of the requirements.
So at some time in 2021 you knew. We're all discovering now this week the extent of this. Why didn't you tell others in your own party, the Nationals, in the coalition as well?
Well, you're making some assumptions there, mate, I've got to say. I did raise it with the leader.
You knew in 2021, so you alerted people, did you, that Scott Morrison had secretly sworn himself into your portfolio?
I had a discussion with Michael McCormack as leader of the Nationals, as you would expect I would. I had a particular view, but Michael was the leader. He was responsible for the agreement between
what did he say?
Our two parties.
What did he say? That the Prime Minister had sworn himself into your portfolio as well? Presumably the Prime Minister then, Scott Morrison, had not told Michael McCormack. Was that news to him?
Well, look, in terms of a very specific issue, we had a number of discussions over a long period of time. If we look in general terms at PEP 11, that's an exploration permit that's been around since 1999. It's nothing new.
Sorry,
it's 20 years.
I'm just trying, just for people in the audience, trying to just get some clarity around this, because so much of the questioning has been around secrecy. You told Michael McCormack, Scott Morrison has sworn himself into my portfolio. Is that what you told your then leader?
Well, if I recall correctly, I think Michael may well have been at one of those meetings. But as I've said,
sorry,
I'm working my way.
I just don't understand what you're saying here, Keith. You were aware that Scott Morrison, sometime in 2021, you became aware that Scott Morrison had sworn himself into your portfolio. The public didn't know this, by the way. And you told Michael McCormack, hey, Scott Morrison has now sworn himself in to my portfolio as effectively co-minister. You told Michael McCormack, the leader of your party, then Deputy Prime Minister, that explicitly.
Well, I'll answer the question if that's okay. It may have occurred in a meeting that Michael was at with all of us, including the PM and his representatives, or it may have been a separate discussion. I'm working my way through what is a very complex diary, as you can imagine. But we certainly had that discussion. Michael was certainly aware.
It just doesn't... Does this make sense to you? I'm sorry, Keith. I know you're here from the government and you are the only one. Thank you for turning up and taking these questions. But so much of this is revolved around secrecy, and I just can't even get an answer from you that makes sense on this. Now you're saying Michael McCormack may have been in the room, you may have said that, the Prime Minister may have. Did you tell your leader, Michael McCormack, Deputy Prime Minister, that the Prime Minister had sworn himself in secretly to your portfolio? Yes? No?
Well, mate, I'll use my own words if that's all right.
Yeah,
We
it's yes or
had
no.
a discussion. Michael was aware, but my recollection was that he may well have been in the room when we had a previous discussion with the PM. But as I've said,
Okay.
I'm working my way through that because I want to be absolutely certain that I've got the timeline right, and this is a serious issue which is before the courts. So you can understand that I'm being very cautious to make sure I get it right.
PEP 11, that decision is brought before the courts. The Scott Morrison issue and swearing himself into your portfolio or multiple portfolios is not yet. Just a final thing, and then I want to come to Kathy here, who's on the panel as well. I just want to be clear here as well. Bridget McKenzie, one of your colleagues, has said that what Scott Morrison did is a breach of the coalition agreement. You're a National. Do you agree with that? That swearing himself in secretly to your portfolio was a breach of that agreement?
Well, 2 points. That agreement is made between the leader of both parties and its contents are between them. And it is an allocation of portfolios based on a proportion. But in terms of things being secret, I mean, the PM made a very clear statement in February in regards to the decision on PEP 11, where he stated outright that he'd taken a decision under that particular act.
Not the portfolios. Kathy, what do you make of all this? And you've walked away from the Liberal Party in New South Wales just last week, but what do you make of what we've seen?
Well, I mean, this is the sort of behaviour that has basically made me feel forced out of politics, because it is not the behaviour of normal people, and it's certainly not... Sorry, Keith, but...
I'm just an electrician, mate, former farmer.
I understand,
doing my best.
But we all know how teams work, and this is definitely, the captain... being the bowler, the batsman, the wicketkeeper, and taking all the catches in slips is not feasible, and it's not how teams operate, and it leaves everyone else on the team feeling pretty unhappy, I would have thought, about the game. So I find it scheming. Of course, everyone wants to know why would he do that. It suggests, he had wanted to have something up his sleeve when he's dealing with his colleagues. So what does that do to trust inside the team? And I would also add, because it was the pandemic, the obligation to be transparent wasn't less, it was so much higher because Parliament wasn't sitting. And everyone had agreed to give him these powers. The obligation on him for disclosure was as high as it could ever be.
Can I go back to Kathy, the old netballer? I'm sorry to use the word old. You said an old netballer. You said, should the Prime Minister be sat down? What do you mean by that? Do you think he should have to leave the Parliament?
Maybe he should start to play an individual sport where if he wins, loses, or it's a draw, he's only got himself to blame, Stan.
Murray Watt, it does raise the question, should the Prime Minister, the former Prime Minister, remain in the Parliament? I haven't heard anyone on your side. There have been some on the other side who've said yes, that he should now step down from his seat. Do you believe he should?
Well, I mean, ultimately it's a matter for the Liberal Party, but my personal view is he should go. And frankly, there's someone else on this panel here tonight who was in on this as well and knew about it. This is an extraordinary revelation tonight on the show that the Deputy Prime Minister of the country was in on this as well, apparently. I don't know whether there were other members of the National Party who knew about it. And this point about the coalition agreement is another problem here. It is a secret agreement. We were calling for years when we were in opposition for the coalition agreement to be revealed. So we've got a secret agreement between the Liberals and the Nationals that is now breached by a secret appointment of a Prime Minister that the Deputy Prime Minister knows about. I mean, I don't know how Keith and Michael McCormack justified that to their National Party colleagues, that they've reneged on an agreement that's supposed to be giving them as a party and therefore country people more of a say.
Well, Keith's had a chance to answer some of those, but Blak Douglas, what do you make of it all?
Well, your conversation there is like trying a right-handed boomerang with your left hand in the wrong wind direction. It's going nowhere. And I think we're all tired of it. You need to talk straight, you fellas, And so certainly Scott Morrison's no Michael Jordan, let's put it that way. He couldn't run the whole show. But that's all. I think we're really asking for that transparency and who's going to step up to the plate and actually offer that to the people.
And can we not use taxpayers' funds to find out what happened? So every time there's an issue, so I think if someone has done something wrong, they should fund it themselves. It should be garnished from their wages or back pay, because it is a Royal Commission or something. It's our money. We need shelters with that money.
Can I ask Murray as well, what about the Governor-General? I mean, Anthony Albanese, as your leader and Prime Minister now, has excused the Governor-General. Scott Morrison says it's not to blame the Governor-General. But isn't there some responsibility here? He's head of state.
Look, it's certainly an odd situation for the Governor-General to have found himself in, but I don't think that we should be absolving Scott Morrison ultimately of his responsibility here.
The Governor-General is the head of state. He'd be the last line of defence. And if he knew something was up, if he thought this was happening in secret, and he was certainly aware as the portfolios mounted, why didn't he do more?
Well, look, I suppose I can only go on the basis of his comments, which is that his role is to act on the advice of the government, and the advice of the government through the Prime Minister was to do this. I mean, just to briefly return to the point about Scott Morrison's future, this is also now a test for Peter Dutton's leadership of the Liberal Party. He's tried to do the old, let's move on, nothing to see here, it's all fine, let's talk about something else. If Peter Dutton is serious about restoring integrity to politics, then he's got a job to do about managing Scott Morrison.
Scott Morrison's defence at the press conference, I really recommend you all watch it. It's an hour of my life I'll never get back. You should suffer too. But it was so fascinating. His defence was, the whole opening is, so I was really good in COVID. You'd all be dead if it wasn't for me. What are you whinging about? And I thought this is a really peculiar response to what he's been accused of. It's deeply weird.
The ends don't justify the means.
Yeah,
I want to move on to our next question, but before we go, Keith Pitt, what do you think Scott Morrison's future should be now that we've had even people on your side calling for him to step down from the Parliament?
Well, Murray's got his talking points up, so he's right. But he's elected by the people of Cook, as I am by the people of Hinkler. I mean, this is how our constitution works. This is how you're elected to the Parliament. It's entirely a decision for Scott and the people that he represents. I'll be doing my best as a member of the opposition. It's not a position that any of us want to be in, as Murray would know. I'm sure he's very pleased to be part of the government. But fundamentally, I stand by the decisions we made throughout the COVID pandemic. They were the right decisions based on the information we had at the time. And as I said earlier, I'd welcome an inquiry. I mean, if Murray wants to ring Albo and say, hey, let's go. Sorry, Prime Minister Albanese, well, let's get on with it.
My question is to Johann. Hi. I watched a program on TEDx regarding depression and anxiety that you spoke of, and we've heard a lot of people here having issues. Not only the floods, but inflation, high interest rates, things like that, and the fires. There is no real national standard for depression really to treat it and to control it by the government. And the marginalized part of society gets more impacted than the rest of the society. What can the governments do to alleviate that problem? And are you aware of better systems in the UK or the US?
Yeah, it's a really important question, and this was very important to me because I had a lot of depression in my teenage years and in my 20s. And so I went on this big journey for my book, Lost Connections, to try to understand. I was very conscious when I started working on that book. Every single year that I've been alive, depression and anxiety had increased in Australia, in Britain, and across the Western world. And I wanted to understand, well, why, right? Why is it that with each year that passes, more and more of us are finding it harder to get through the day? And then obviously in the last 2 years, as everyone knows, for obvious reasons, depression and anxiety doubled, right, in Britain, and I'm sure there was a very similar increase here in Australia. So I wanted to understand why. And it's a complicated question. I learned there's actually scientific evidence for 9 causes of depression and anxiety. But I think something that connects a lot of them, not all of them. So everyone here knows you've got natural physical needs, right? You need food, you need water, you need shelter, you need clean air. If I took those things away from you, you'd all be in real trouble real fast. But there's equally strong evidence that all human beings have natural psychological needs. You need to feel you belong. You need to feel your life has meaning and purpose. You need to feel that people see you and value you. You need to feel you've got a future that makes sense. I'm thinking about all of you talking about not knowing if you have a future that makes sense, right? So when we think about depression, we've thought about it in a very narrow way. We've thought about it primarily as a biological malfunction. There are definitely biological contributions. Some people are really helped by chemical antidepressants. Anyone in the audience in that position, carry on taking them. But we've got to understand this in a much deeper way. Depression and anxiety did not double in the last 2 years because all of our brains started to spontaneously malfunction. They doubled because we were cut off from each other. We were financially insecure. We were terribly anxious. In this community, I can't imagine how much it went up. So when you ask what the government's got to do, there's loads of things they've got to do. They've got to understand, first of all, and we've all got to understand, depression is not primarily a malfunction. Depression is a signal. It's telling us something. It's telling us that our deeper needs are not being met. We need to stop insulting that signal and start listening to it.
But Johann, you did point out that the chemical response is also important because you have been criticised by some for saying that you went off medication because you felt as though you were still dealing with depression. But the chemical response is still important.
So to be fair to the people who said that, they admit they haven't read my book. In the book I talk about, that's not what I say.
But that was the criticism.
Yeah, but they haven't read it, and they admitted they hadn't read it, to be totally fair to them. No, I think we need to understand this in a broad... For something as complex as depression, there needs to be a broad menu of options that deal with the underlying causes. Chemical antidepressants, 100% should be one of the things on the menu. They helped me for a while, and then sadly for me, they stopped helping me. But we've got to have a much broader range. Can I give you an example of just one thing? I go through loads in the book, Lost Connections, but I'll give you an example of one. One reason why depression has exploded is because of loneliness, right? We are the loneliest society in human history, even before the lockdowns began.
Even though we're so connected in so many other ways.
Well, we've got this kind of parody of connection through the internet, but that's not what we need. So what happened in Britain is there was a programme led by an amazing man I got to know named Dr. Sam Everington, who's a doctor. So he noticed that loads of his patients were depressed and anxious for really understandable reasons, like they were really lonely. So he decided to pioneer a different approach. One day a woman came to see him called Lisa Cunningham, who I got to know later. And he said to her, "Don't worry, I'll carry on giving you these drugs. I'm also going to prescribe something else. I'm going to prescribe for you to come twice a week to the doctor's offices here and meet with a group of other depressed and anxious people. Not to talk about how bad you feel. You can do that if you want to. That's not the point. I want you to find something meaningful you could do together." The first time the group met, Lisa literally vomited with anxiety. It was so overwhelming. But they started talking. They're like, what could they do? These are inner city East London people like me. They didn't know anything about gardening, but there was an area behind the doctor's offices that was just like scrubland. They started to turn it into a garden. They got their fingers in the soil. They started to learn the rhythms of the seasons. The way Lisa put it to me, as the garden began to bloom, we began to bloom. They started to form a tribe. They started to care about each other. If one of them didn't show up, they go solve each other's problems. There was a small study in Norway of a very similar program. This approach is called social prescribing. Found it was more than twice as effective as chemical antidepressants because it was dealing with some of the deep underlying reasons. Now, loneliness is not the only reason. There's a lot of reasons, but we've got to understand these are signals. Don't insult the signal. Listen to the signal. It's telling us something so important.
Neil, thank you for your question. I hope some of that information was useful for you. If this discussion does raise any difficulties for you, of course, the numbers for Lifeline, Beyond Blue and the Kids Helpline, you can see there on your screen as well.
My question's for you, Blak Douglas. You're very political and you have already demonstrated that you're maintaining that politicalness here tonight. But my question for you is, has the Archibald restricted you or made you feel more freedom to maintain that political platform?
It's landed me a spot on Q&A, hasn't it? Which I must thank my publicist for. Look, it's been a roller coaster ride of emotions, the whole thing. The credit, I can't emphasise enough, the credit needs to be given to the trustees at the Art Gallery of New South Wales for taking the opportune moment to choose such an image. That painting has very proudly become a flagship of Lismore.
Let's tell people about that for people who are unfamiliar. It's about a flood survivor.
Yeah, so it features Carla Dickens, who is a dear friend of mine, a celebrated Wiradjuri female artist, and she's in Ganella Bar up in Lismore, so watching and also harbouring families that were in need of care during that time. It couldn't have been more topical to paint such an image. and to have that image celebrated. So it's so much credit owed there. But in terms of, it has given a glimpse of hope of how art can be a powerful conveyor of political commentary.
I was going to ask you about that. What's the role of an artist in this time? Listen to the conversation we've had tonight. Trust, truth, accountability, loneliness, people uncertain. What do you look for as an artist when you're trying to speak to that and also make a political statement, as you say?
Well, we're of a certain ilk that is a bit of a rarity and a bit of a kind of a pushing a boulder up a hill in terms of urban political artists. Basically, respectively, Carla and I make works about the effects of colonisation on First Nations people. So it's an honour to be able to have that art celebrated in Australia rather than how foreign countries treat their politicised artists. So I'm very thankful for that. And so my responsibility is to send those subtle reminders out to the community, just to remind for those who claim that we are the greatest country on the planet, we've got a little bit of work to do.
Stan,
Yeah.
can I just confirm that was so uplifting for Lismore and the Northern Rivers community when the Archibald Prize was given, and I thank you so much for choosing that. It does bring people together, which comes back again to what you said earlier, that we need to come together in a disaster. And we had, that wonderful music festival where all those bands volunteered and it brought Lismore together. Poured with rain, of course, but the joy at that festival, it was so uplifting. So know what a difference you've made to ordinary people. Everyone's very grateful.
Thank you.
That's all we have time for tonight. Please thanks our panel, Johann Hari, Catherine Cusack, Murray Watt, Blak Douglas, Amanda Rose, and Keith Pitt. Thank you, Keith, for coming to us from remote. Thanks to those of you here and at home as well for sharing your questions. Next week, we're live from Melbourne. We're going to be discussing ethics in sport. How do we balance fairness and inclusion in Australian sport today? Joining me on that panel, Olympic champion Kieran Perkins, handball player Hannah Mounsey, former NRL player Joe Williams, Pacific sport consultant David Lakisa, and sports lawyer Catherine Ordway. Do go to our website. You can register to be in the audience there. Now, something really special to leave you with. We're going to leave you with some wise words from local legend Uncle Wes Marne. Now, Uncle Wes, at 100 years of age, has just published his first book of poetry. Uncle Wes, how are you?
I'm good, thanks.
I was given the honour of being there to launch that book. It was a really special day, Uncle. Now, you're going to leave us with a poem that I believe was inspired by Paul Keating's Redfern Address. What's the name of the poem?
Indigenous one.
Take it away.
Can you tell them what Paul Keating said?
I won't go into it all, but Paul Keating essentially said that for the first time from a Prime Minister that Australians were the ones, white Australians were the ones who took the children, who stole the land, who created so much of the misery that First Nations people still live with, didn't he, Uncle Wes? And committed that day to being responsible, to commit to reconciliation and to change that. Take it away with your poem.
Right. Indigenous people of this earth's land, now's the time for us all to join hands, to let the world know that we're still here. Let's do it now, for this is our year. Let the world know that our culture's alive. Let them all know that we have survived. And we'll let them all know that we are still strong. And we'll let them all know that we are not wrong. And while there's one to tell stories, and there's one to hear, while we still do our dances, they'll know we're still here. While we still sing our songs, and still hunt our land, no one can take that culture from our hand. So let the old ones tell the story, and let the young ones hear and learn. Tell them of our days of glory, so that for more they will yearn. And they will teach their young ones, and teach them what we were told, and we will be here forever, and our culture will never grow old.
Uncle Wes Marne.